Okay, so this is going to be just a quick one on lake formation permissions and how it works. This was something that kind of confused me, but I'll explain in this session. So at the moment, we have Athena, right, where we write all of our SQL code, and that goes and sends our query via glue, and then that goes into Athena, pulls, into S3, pulls all the data out of S3 via glue. Glue parses the data, and then Athena takes all that parsed data and then runs your query against it, right? So what my issue was I didn't fully understand how the permissions and access was granted in that whole chain of events. So if you were granted access to the S3 objects, does that mean that's all you needed? Or do you only need access to Athena to write all your queries? Do you need access to the underlying S3 objects or not? Again, how it's set up right now, I don't fully understand or appreciate how it's been done, but somehow it actually works. I'll just explain how I kind of understand how lake formation sits in all of this. So this little diagram, you've got the users at the top and you've got your S3 bucket at the bottom, and you've all got your data in S3, right? So the idea is, hopefully, in some instances, we might have some users that we want to provision access to specific users only, but we don't want to provision access to the underlying data objects. So this is especially useful if we want to provision data to specific tables, specific databases, or specific rows or cells. So we want to be able to control everything all the way down to a single individual cell level. So what I couldn't understand before is, how do we provision that access? Do we still need to provision access to the S3 objects, or is that not the case? So this little diagram kind of helps me kind of visualize how it's all working at the moment. So you've got your users, they've written the SQL code, they're using Athena to parse all of their SQL code. Then Athena will request access into lake formation, saying, okay, this user wants to run this SQL code. It's going to need access to this underlying Athena table or glue table. And then lake formation is going to either provision or deny access. And then if it's going to allow access to that table, then it will get the schema from the glue catalog, and then also get the data from S3 bucket. I guess the main point here is, even though it's going from point to point, so a user is calling Athena, and then Athena is calling a different service, which is lake formation, then lake formation might be calling glue catalog, and glue is calling S3. So each of these different hops, there's actually a different role that's being used. So the role up here at the top, say this little hat, might provide you access to Athena, but also might deny you access to the underlying S3 objects. But that doesn't necessarily mean you can or cannot access the data via Athena. What's more is there's another set of roles that are kind of service roles, where lake formation will have a service role where it has access to the glue catalog and not have access to the S3 buckets. So let's say lake formation has access to 1 of 10 S3 buckets, and then the user actually has no access to any S3 buckets. So what happens is, because the user is allowed access to Athena, then Athena might be allowed access to lake formation. Then you add, I guess, permissions at the lake formation level, which dictate whether or not the user has access to the data via this chain. And it's just provisioned at the lake formation level. So instead of going directly to S3, it goes via this chain. And in going via this chain, there's a process of, I guess, confirmation of whether or not this user has access to the data via Lake Formation. So even though Lake Formation might have access to a complete bucket per se, that bucket might have another 10 different tables inside it, and Lake Formation manages that separately, independently of the roles that are listed here. So you can think of it, there's another little permissions table attached to Lake Formation where it manages which roles have access to which data. Okay, so I'll just show you what that looks like. So if we go over to Lake Formation, as I said, Lake Formation is kind of a service, and then the service as a whole has access to different resources, and they call it locations, data locations, I believe. Data lake locations. I've deleted everything out of mine at the moment. Oh, great. So that means nothing will come up. So I'll deploy this solution, and it would show you everything. Okay, so as I said, you've got your Lake Formation. So this is that little box that we were looking at, Lake Formation. And Lake Formation, you need to register different data lake locations. So they could be S3 is the most simple example of a data lake location. And you need to register that location. Then the service as a whole needs to have a role that provides access to that location. So if it's an S3 bucket, then it needs access to that S3 bucket using that role. Then what happens is under permissions, the data lake permissions, you manage the different accesses to that data lake location in this area. So it's not managed in the IAM policy documents anymore. It's used in combination with the IAM policy documents and the roles, along with this table here. This will get populated in a moment once this thing completes. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. Yeah, so this is used in, it's kind of like in conjunction with Glue, or I'd say Glue is just there to keep all the different data schemas, whereas Lake Formation builds on top of Glue, adding permissions and management of those different data schemas. So the Glue is just like different files, and then you've got Lake Formation, which is providing access to those different files or different data schemas. All right, is this done yet? So this solution, it's just setting up the Lake Formation service. I think we can see some here. Okay. So here along the left, you can see the principal. So each principal normally relates to a user, a role, or a group. And these are IAM roles or IAM resources. So when you are writing your query, you're assuming a specific role. So for example, here I've assumed the SG AWS Analytics Dev Discovery Analytics role, and that would come up as an entry here. That's this entry right here. And then each of these lines dictate whether or not I have access to different things. So remember in Glue, there's the idea of databases. So here, it's got an entry saying discovery analytics. This is IAM role. This is for the database, CloudTrail database, saying for this catalog. So this is the Athena catalog. And then it defines what type of access is available to that role and what they can grant. So that's at the database level. Then you've got another entry here for the individual table. So this is for the individual table, still relating to the CloudTrail database. And then table here is the CloudTrail Kinesis CDK Demo 2 stack table. And it's defining what type of access I have to that. Now this is kind of redundant, but anyway, so this is at the column level. You can again define how much access you want to give. So I guess all I wanted to highlight and show is at the moment how we've set up our Athena, Glue, and S3. The permissions for that, everything is just full admin rights. Everyone has access to all of the data on S3 and via Athena. Now, if you wanted to manage it in a more controlled fashion and you wanted to allow more cross-account data access and you wanted to manage that data access a little bit more fine-grained rather than opening up a whole bucket, you can use Lake Formation to manage that. And you use cross-account roles, and you'd have foreign roles appearing here, and you could define whether or not they have access to the database, table, the column, and the cell. So very fine-grained control access to each of the data elements. All right, I'll leave that here as the first session, and then I'm going to start to cover govern tables. All right, thanks.